Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So my name is Gabby Wiersma, and I'm head of collection development here in the university libraries. And I'm very happy to have such a great turnout for this event today. So just a little bit of background information. This event is jointly sponsored by the university libraries, the Conference on World Affairs, and the Colorado Open Scholarship Series, which is a group of academic libraries across the state of Colorado who are hosting a series of events on different campuses this week to increase awareness, to promote open access, open data, and open educational resources, or open scholarship in general. So in addition to the people who are here in this room, we actually have participants at various academic institutions across the state of Colorado viewing the presentation with us. So we're very excited to kind of have this broad participation across the state. And we've invited experts from SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities for supporting open scholarship at each of our campuses and in academia and beyond. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, who is Nicole Allen, who is the Director of Open Education for SPARC. And Nicole will be talking a little bit about the importance of open educational resources. She'll give us a little bit of an overview and definitions about what they are, give us an overview of what's happening at different levels. And I'm really happy to have Nicole as an expert in this area. She's been an expert and a leading voice in the movement for open education, starting from the time that she was a student. And we're really excited to hear what she has today. So Nicole is going to give us a presentation, probably about 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions and answers following her talk. So please welcome Nicole Allen.
Thanks, Gabby, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited to be here in Colorado. Nice break from being in Washington, D.C. As Gabby mentioned, my work on the issue of open education and addressing the high cost of course materials started during my days as a student. It started the first day of university for me. I walked into my college bookstore and saw the prices of textbooks I had to buy. And this was in 2003, so well over a decade ago. And I thought textbooks were expensive, but textbook prices have actually more than doubled since then. And what we're going to talk about here today is the opportunities around leveraging the digital environment and technology and just our ability to communicate today as a solution to this problem. So I'm going to start out with some of the indicators of the problem, talk about what open educational resources are, some of the ways that it's entering into the market, how it's impacting people's lives, and some ideas for what you can do. And I just want to note that SPARC is a library membership organization, so we work with academic and research libraries across North America and the world to make open the default way for sharing information in research and education. And we're thrilled to be here on one of our member campuses. And I know that many of you in the audience are part of the library here. And just thank you for all of your efforts. The campuses, advocacy organizations like SPARC are out there talking about these issues all the time, but it's here on campus where the rubber really hits the road. So thank you all for the work that you do. So to start out, let's just take a look at the status quo of textbook prices. So do we have any students in the audience? Yeah, so you guys know. The cost of textbooks is out of control. So this is just a graph showing how textbook prices have increased about 82% over the last decade. That's 3 times the rate of inflation and actually faster than tuition and fees have been rising. And we all know those cost pressures. And overall, the cost of higher education is what many call a crisis here in the United States. Students are taking on more and more debt to fund their education. In fact, we as Americans hold over $1 trillion in student debt. And when you look at the cost of textbooks in the context of an education, these graphs show at various levels of education, 2-year publics at the top and 4-year nonprofit private institutions at the bottom. Textbook costs are the tiny little blue slice over there. It looks like a relatively small cost. Most colleges, the budget for books and supplies is about $1,200 to $1,300 a year, which is a lot of money, even though it's a small slice of the overall cost of education. But it's important to think about this cost as something that is treated differently with students than the other expenses they face. So students are taking on a lot of debt and receiving financial aid that directly covers costs like housing, room and board, tuition, and all financial aid goes to pay for those expenses before it goes to pay for things like textbooks. So textbook costs are often being paid out of pocket and are one of the last expenses that students pay. So the psychological impact can be a lot greater, and it can lead to financial decisions where students simply don't have the money to buy the textbooks at the time or need to delay. And I like to say it's the straw that breaks the camel's back in a lot of cases. And that's the challenge we're facing. And I just want to illustrate with one example of a common textbook that's assigned. This is Principles of Economics, 8th edition by Gregory Mankiw, which is kind of the canonical intro economics textbooks. I wouldn't be surprised if it was used here, although I don't know that that's the case. Not everybody may be able to see the price there, but if you can't, any guesses to how much this book costs, if you can't see? So yeah, it's $406. For intro economics. $406, that is out of control. Imagine being a freshman, you show up on your college campus for intro economics, you go into the bookstore and it's $406 for one textbook. So I think most of us know that there are a lot of ways to save money on textbooks. So, going online and buying used copies, you can do that. Although not if it comes with a digital access code for special supplements that expire at the end of the semester. You can also rent in some cases, and what we're seeing a lot more is digital options where students can get digital access to the textbook, and in this particular case, you can buy the digital standalone for $126 instead of $406. So it's not bad, right? It's a lot less expensive, about a third of the price. But when I say not bad, I mean less expensive. $126 is still a lot of money to a college student. But here's the thing. So you don't know until you get into your cart that this is actually for 6 months of access. So you're not actually buying your textbook. You're getting digital access for 6 months. And on many campuses, Principles of Economics is actually taught as a 2-semester course. And you can't fit 2 semesters into 6 months, can you? So you're actually not saving all that much money with the digital option. But here's the thing, with digital technology, it gives us the ability to do things that aren't possible in the digital world, like access it from any machine that you're on, to have multiple copies on multiple devices, to save it forever on a flash drive, rather than lugging around a huge library of books with you for the rest of your life. Like, those are all of the great things that the digital environment makes possible. But this is the exact opposite of that. It artificially imposes limitations, like the book disappearing after 6 months. Is this the norm we want for education, where the message this communicates to students is that this textbook you've been assigned isn't valuable enough for you to keep. You can only access it for 6 months. And you know what? You better read it real quick, because zap, it's going to disappear. So I like to call it the Men in Black model for textbooks, where there's that moment where they take out the device and erase your memory. Sorry, I feel like this is a dated reference. It makes me feel old. But it is really like that. Do we want Men in Black textbooks, or do we want digital resources that take full advantage of what the digital environment offers us? So with this transition to the Men in Black digital model, we're starting to see traditional textbook publishers trying to sell wholesale solutions like this on campus. You may have seen this article in Inside Higher Ed talking about inclusive access models. You may have heard this term on campus. And this idea is where either the professor or the institution opts into a program where students are automatically charged for digital access to a textbook. So rather than going out and buying their course materials on their own, which is the way it works right now, the cost of the material would be borne by the student directly in their student account. And on one hand, economically, this makes more sense because right now only less than half of the students in any given class actually have the current edition of the textbook anyway. And even fewer of those students are buying it from the publisher in a way that the publisher makes a profit on that. And that's one of the drivers of prices going up. So it'd be much more efficient to just charge everyone less rather than having a few students be the ones that bears the cost of production. But the problem with that is that it locks students into paying a certain amount for the textbooks. It removes any choice from the equation, which is what students have now. And it sets up a market where, if we thought publishers were increasing prices rapidly right now, imagine when they don't even have students to contend with in terms of what the books cost. So I think this is something we really need to keep an eye on in terms of the model for where things are going. This could be the future for us, where institutions simply rent access to textbooks and it's automatically deducted from students' account and all accountability for prices is removed. So watch this space. So the reason that kind of model is just so dangerous is that the textbook market doesn't work like a normal market. It works differently, where the student, the consumer of the product, actually has no say in what product they buy. They have to buy the material they've been assigned by the professor. And of course, we all know that's the way it needs to work because professors are the experts. They're the ones that know what's best for their students and what they want to teach with. So that's not something we should change. But it creates this dynamic where the publishing industry has been able to keep increasing prices year over year because students have no choice but to pay them. It's not helped by the fact that there is a near monopoly in the market. There are only 5 major publishers that control the vast majority of it, which has allowed these same practices of really high prices and a transition to digital that just includes all of the same limitations that the print model imposes on us without any real competition. And because there are only 5 major companies that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing, it's really difficult for innovators to break into this marketplace. So it creates a high barrier to entry. So another factor of the marketplace that we're seeing is that student spending on textbooks is actually going down. And that may seem counterintuitive because of that graph I showed before that had prices going up. This doesn't make sense. So there are a lot of reasons this could be. So one is that more cost-saving options are available, renting used books, these digital options which are inferior but do offer lower prices. But we're also seeing an alarming trend of students simply not buying their required textbooks. And there have been recent studies that found that about 2 out of every 3 students say that they have skipped buying at least one of their required textbooks because the cost is too high. And the vast majority of the students who say that they've skipped buying a textbook say that they did so even thinking it could hurt their grades. So the textbooks that are being assigned aren't serving the purpose that they're meant to do, which is help students succeed in the course. The status quo is broken. We're also seeing this have impacts in terms of student success measures. So students are saying that about half of students say that they at some time have taken fewer courses because of the cost of textbooks, which means it's taking them longer to get through their degree. So they're paying more in tuition to take more courses over more years. They're taking longer to enter into the economy and the workplace. and start earning to cover the cost of the debt that they've likely taken on. About 2/3 of students have debt. And there are also measures that look at the number of students who've dropped courses because of the cost of textbooks, who failed a course because of the cost of textbooks, who've actually dropped out of college altogether because they couldn't afford that additional cost. But it also has an impact inside of the classroom. So I mentioned this before, about less than half of the students in any given class will have the current edition of a textbook. And I always bring up this statistic with faculty because it's easy to think the material that I'm assigning in my course is the best thing to help my students learn. And that may be true, but if less than half of the students actually have the material you've assigned them, are they really learning from it? Not all of the students in that course are on the same page. So it brings us to this idea that students can't learn from materials they can't afford. And the existing system and marketplace of course materials and course content just isn't serving the purpose that it's intended to serve. And that's why I'm glad to be here talking about openness, because we can do better. We have the technology, we have the materials, we have the knowledge within our academies to be able to do better for students. And that's where this idea of openness comes in, by changing the way that we create and share educational resources. So let's talk about open. So this term open education is used broadly. And this generally encompasses all forms of opening up the way that we educate. So it could be removing barriers to registration, so opening up ways for students to get access to both formal and informal educational opportunities. It could be things like MOOCs that are published, where courses are taught online, and where anybody can register and sit in on the course and learn the material. Or it could be about legal barriers, where you're removing copyright restrictions from resources that make them more difficult to use and share. So it's a general principle that looks at the advantages we have with today's technology and remove legal, technical, and access barriers to education. And SPARC's work, and I think what we're going to focus on here today in terms of this talk, is specifically on educational resources that are open. And when we say educational resources, we just mean any kind of material that can be used for education, whether that's a full course or a textbook or a video lecture, a syllabus, a curriculum, any type of resource, data, anything like that. And we use this abbreviation OER to describe open educational resources. And a simple way of just putting this all, and this is a soundbite we often use when talking about OER on campus because it's kind of a weird acronym, educational materials that are distributed at no cost with permission for everybody to freely use, share, and build upon the content. And that last part is important because that's what we mean by open. Open has a very specific meaning when it's used as part of this term, open educational resources. It means, one, free, so it's distributed for free of cost, free of barriers. And then two is that it comes with a set of permissions, the permission to use the resource in all of the ways that are possible today in the digital environment. And we use the 5R framework to describe these permissions. So the right that makes something open, the right to retain, meaning the right to keep and control a copy forever. So there's no Men in Black moment where your resource disappears. You can keep it forever. It's not going to disappear. Two, the right to reuse, meaning to take a resource and use it however you want, whether it's for educational purposes or otherwise. The right to revise, meaning to take a copy of a resource and make it relevant to your context. So for teachers, that could mean taking out examples that aren't relevant for your students and adding them in. So for example, if a math word problem talks about the Appalachian Mountains, you might want to take that out and replace it with the Rocky Mountains. the right to remix, which means taking multiple resources and mixing them together. So for example, taking chapters from different textbooks that are open and using them to create a new resource, a new textbook with some chapters from each, or embedding multimedia like audio or video inside of a print-based resource. And then finally, the right to redistribute, which means to share in any format, anywhere, with anybody. So that's the 5 R's. And this idea of permission is really grounded in this weird tension that we have in today's world, where technology has enabled all of these new ways of being able to interact with content. I mean, think about the way that we use the web, right? It's all about copy, paste, edit, share, you know, there was a time when copying and pasting literally meant taking scissors and cutting paper and gluing parts of, you know, paper in different places. But, you know, now technology makes it possible to edit resources in real time and make them up to date and deliver content that is relevant to the current times. But the challenge is that the default rules of copyright automatically forbid that, whether you as the creator of a resource want them to or not. And there is that challenge where we have all of these abilities, but we don't have the permission to do that. And that's where openness helps fix things. And in most cases, when we're talking about open, the rights have been granted with Creative Commons license or other open license, which is a legal tool that just communicates those permissions. I think I see a lot of nodding heads. Most people are familiar with Creative Commons. It's a nonprofit that's created a licensing system that makes it easy. The licenses they offer range from really open, which means, you know, public domain, where you actually release all copyrights, down to licenses where you permit anybody to use materials as long as they don't change them or use them commercially. And generally, part of that range is considered OER, as long as you have the 5R rights. So that ends the legal jargon portion of this talk, but I think it's useful to kind of hear the background of what open means before going into talking about what it looks like out in the world. So I'm going to run through a few examples of the leading OER projects and institutions across the country. So I think the first one that a lot of people think of when you hear about open educational resources or the word open courseware is MIT, which in the early 2000s launched a program called MIT Open Courseware, where they created a platform where teachers at MIT could take resources that they're already developing through the course of their teaching and post them online for anybody to download and use and share. And this ended up being a wildly successful program. Over 200 million people all across the world have used these resources. They've been translated into over 6 languages, and another 50 million people have used those translations. Again, something that isn't possible in a closed environment that is possible when you share things openly. And it's also been fabulous for the institution's reputation. You know, they have actually found that students apply to MIT, especially international students, because they've been able to access these free online course materials that let them see what the quality of an MIT education looks like. And you know, there are only a couple thousand students a year that get to go through MIT. But this way, the value of an MIT degree isn't decreased by sharing these resources. In fact, it's increased. And they're able to impact a whole lot more students too. So that's one example. Since then, over 200 institutions across the world have launched programs like this, where faculty can share resources they've created. For campuses that don't have programs like this, there are a number of repositories online where you can share, as an individual subject matter expert, resources you've created. One example is oercommons.org, and you can go there and find hundreds of thousands of resources from all different subjects and all different levels of education that are all openly licensed and can be freely shared. So more recently, the OER space has focused in around the idea of a textbook. And, in higher education, textbooks kind of are the currency of course content right now. And there have been a number of projects that have worked to develop open textbooks that are equivalent in quality to traditional textbooks. They just carry an open license and offer all of the advantages too. So this project, OpenStax, is based out of Rice University in Texas, and they've published open textbooks for the 20 highest enrollment college courses. These books are fully peer-reviewed. They're written by academic authors, and they come with a lot of the instructor resources that professors have come to rely on, like PowerPoint slides and test banks and things like that. So this is, there was actually just a study done that found that these books have on average 10% market share in the subjects where they have been published, which is truly remarkable. When you think about it, they've only been around for a couple of years. For individual books to reach 10% market share in that short of time is actually unheard of. So it speaks to the quality of these resources. And just by way of contrast, here's their economics textbook. I showed you the $400 economics textbook earlier. You can access this one for free online right now if you go to their website. You can download a PDF for free. You can order a print copy on Amazon for $38.50, but that's optional. You could also print this locally or print it out on your home computer, although it's going to be cheaper to buy it on Amazon. Don't print it at the library. And just for kicks, I wanted to show you the online version of this book. This is what it looks like on the internet. You can see there's the table of contents on the side, and you can click through key terms. I did choose the chapter on elasticity of pricing, which is the economic concept that describes why textbook prices have gotten so expensive. You could read about it in Mancu's Economics if you could afford the textbook, but if you're interested, you can read more here. So that's the textbook side of things. In terms of other types of publications, there's also a lot of great open educational resources out there in the form of open access journals. So there's one example is PLOS, which publishes a number of open access journals that carry an open license and publish peer-reviewed research. A number of their journals have very high impact factors. And you can go to their website and download all of their research papers and assign them to students for free. And what we've actually seen is a number of producers of open textbooks and open educational content take things like images or graphs or figures, case studies, out of these peer-reviewed research articles and put them inside of open educational resources. So it's actually repurposing or reusing a lot of the valuable content that's published as part of scholarship. On a more macro level, there are some institutions that are doing full courses. At Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania, they have their Open Learning Initiative, which has published fully articulated courses that you can take online that have all open materials. And it's really cool because they collect a ton of data through people who all over the world log in and take these courses. And it actually helps them conduct research on learning psychology, but also helps them improve the course. They're able to identify places where there are actually problems, where students maybe start missing questions over and over again, and they can go in and intervene. And we're starting to see a lot more discussion of this idea of analytics and real-time assessment of students and content. And I think this program really illustrates the value of open content versus closed. So a lot of traditional publishers now will offer these kind of learning analytics for traditional materials. But if you identify a problem in the content, so if your students keep missing a core concept, you are powerless to change the resource they're using because it's a traditional closed license resource that a publisher controls, not you. Whereas with open resources, you have the right to go in and change it to make sure that it's addressing the needs of your students, rather than needing to do other kinds of interventions that break the flow of the course. So that's a macro example of OER. want to give a micro example that actually, so this is part of my standard slide deck, but I'm thrilled to say that this is actually a project right here on campus at CU Boulder. It's the FET project. They have created a huge set of high quality interactive simulations for physics and other sciences that illustrate concepts. I think the one on here is, one you can see here is from biology. And these resources are openly licensed and freely shared online. They're widely used in open educational resources, but they're also used in Pearson textbooks and other traditionally published resources. So that just illustrates that the open educational resources movement isn't trying to replace traditional content necessarily. It's trying to do content in a more efficient way so that everybody can benefit from it. So the final example I want to give of where OER is kind of being developed and used comes out of policy. So at the US Department of Labor a few years ago, they created a grant program that has possibly one of the most ridiculous acronyms that has ever been invented. The TAACCCT program, the Trade Adjustment Assistance Community College and Career Training Grants Program, which was a $2 billion grant fund to support the improvement of workforce training programs in trade-affected areas, so people whose jobs were moved overseas to help retrain them. And through this program, what they did is require that anybody who develops a new workforce training program, they need to openly license whatever they create, so that other areas with similar problems can benefit too. And there's a website online where you can download all of these resources. So if you're in an area where you're doing a skills-based course or a career-based course, you can use all of these resources under an open license. One really cool example that I know of is there's a university in the state of Chihuahua in Mexico who was developing a couple of workforce training programs in aerospace and energy. And rather than starting from scratch and developing their own work, they were working with USAID, the US organization, and funded by them. They actually went here and pulled down the curriculum in clean energy and aerospace and translated it into Spanish and made some adjustments that made it more relevant to their context and used that. So we saved money as taxpayers because USAID didn't need to fund the development of a whole new curriculum. But we actually benefited from it because there's a huge Spanish-speaking population in the United States that actually could benefit from reading and learning these materials in their mother tongue. So just another example of the kind of cool stuff that happens when you make things open that just can't happen in the traditional environment. So I want to give a couple of illustrations of why this all matters. And I think one of the most important proof points that we have is a growing body of academic research that shows that when students use OER, they tend to do better than with traditional resources. And part of this is that students have access to the material starting day one of the course, as opposed to having to wait or work or not even buy the textbook at all. But also the ability to tailor the resources to students has an impact as well. So you can go to this website, openedgroup.org/review, and find over a dozen peer-reviewed studies that look at the measurable student outcomes using traditional textbooks. And I'll just give you one example. This is at Mercy College in New York. Their math faculty transitioned from using an expensive traditional resource to using open resources and observed a 12 percentage point increase in the student success measure and the number of students passing the course with a C or above. And if you hear the people who run this course talk about it, they'll say, we originally did it as a way to reduce costs, but what we actually found is it was a way to take ownership over the resources we were using in our education, and that actually had a greater impact on students. Another illustration comes out of Virginia at a community college there. where they took the benefits of OER and actually concentrated it within a degree pathway. So they looked at their two-year business administration degree and replaced all of the course materials they were using with OER in at least one section of the course. And they called it the Z degree for zero cost, because you could literally get a two-year business administration degree without spending a single dollar on textbook costs. And in this context, it reduced the overall cost by about 20% for students. And they're just incredible stories that come out of this when you concentrate those benefits. I talked with one student who said that because of the money she saved with this business administration degree, she was a non-traditional student, single mother, she was able to save enough money to put braces on her daughter and give her a beautiful smile for the rest of her life. And, you know, that's just an example of the kind of impact that you know, changing the way that we share information can have on people's lives. There are also great examples of faculty who move in this direction and are able to revise their courses. So UMass Amherst, and we've talked about this program a number of times here on campus today, runs what's called a mini grant program in their library, where they give small incentive grants to faculty who want to switch from using traditional textbooks to OER and other free resources. And they've saved students $1.3 million, but have these great examples of faculty who have been able to create whole new curriculums that better serve their students. And they're actually tracking how much money they've saved their students through the process. This one professor in ECE saved students over $25 in just the first semester, which is pretty powerful. And from the faculty perspective, it can have an impact as authors too. And I think, you know, being here at CU Boulder, you know, at a research university, you have textbook authors here who have successful textbooks. And I want to give you one example of some authors who published an open textbook and actually found that it advanced their careers. So these two authors had published a traditional statistics textbook. And, you know, we're getting a few $1,000s of royalties every year, but the publisher took it out of print, and they were able to get the copyright back. And rather than just, you know, publishing it privately, what they did is they revised it, created a new edition, and released it as an open educational resource through OpenStax, the project I mentioned before. And now there have literally been millions of people that have been impacted by their work. So not just a couple of thousand people a year. And it's received an award from the Texan Academic Authors Association. And just the impact of their scholarship and their expertise in this subject has reached so many more people and has been so much larger because they made it open rather than just, you know, having another statistics textbook. So there are lots of opportunities there. And this book is actually being sustained by this program, OpenStax, through their partnerships with outside commercial entities. So there are actually models in place to support authors getting paid for their work and keeping resources up to date. What OpenStax does is they'll pay upfront authors to write the textbooks and then generate a revenue stream through optional side products like homework software or tutoring services or selling print copies of books that sustain the project. So there are models that are helping us to transition in this direction. And the final illustration I want to give is another textbook example. So this is a book that was developed by a professor at Brigham Young University. He was teaching a course called Project Management for Instructional Designers, which is a master's level course. And there isn't really a textbook for this course. He could have probably cobbled something together, but by making his students buy a bunch of different textbooks and using chapters from each. But instead what he did is he took an open textbook for general project management and assigned to his students to turn it into a project management book for instructional designers. So rather than writing essays that the students probably didn't like writing and then forcing him to grade those essays and then everybody just agrees to throw it away at the end of the semester, he actually assigned to his students to create a publication that would serve as the core course material for both themselves and future generations of the course. So it's called open pedagogy. It's a new way of teaching. And all of the students in this class got A's. And as graduate students, it was actually valuable to them because they were able to put their name on a publication. And this book, if you go and look at it, the copyright date is 2017, because this book is literally up to the minute, up to date. And this is just an illustration of what the professor said about why. So by way of closing, I just want to run through a few things for you to think about as you leave this room. So the first thing that I think is just important is when you can share, do share. So not everybody is ready to write an open textbook and put it online, but are there resources you're creating that could be beneficial to share? There are actually potentially ways that you're already sharing things openly. These are all platforms online that enable open licenses. YouTube, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the world's largest open educational resource. So think about ways that you can share the content that you're creating. Second, to think about open as the default, considering OER first. You know, not everybody is ready to start using OER. There is an OER for every professor right now, but take a look and see. There's a great resource developed by the University of Minnesota called the Open Textbook Library that has a curated collection of over I think 300 now open textbooks across a wide variety of subjects that have actually been reviewed by faculty. So it's a good measure of the quality of the resource because you can read the opinions of other subject matter experts. This is a great place to start. I encourage you to write this address down. And you know, if we can just get one professor for each student to replace one textbook with an open educational resource, it would save students across the country $1.42 billion. Third, think about ways that you can support faculty. You know, obviously, faculty are the linchpin here. They're the ones that are both creating educational content and assigning it. How can we do better to support faculty for those of us who aren't faculty, and for those of you who are, how can you support your colleagues? One example is this great effort at Virginia Tech, where the library worked with the business school to take an open textbook that had published a number of years ago and update it and create a revised version of it that was published and now is used at the business school and published by their library for use at other schools as well. And then finally, just think about how open fits into your mission, both your department or your library, but also your institution. And every institution I visit, I look at their mission statement, and there's open embedded in all of them. And here, you're talking about how do we affect communities through collaborative research and innovation and entrepreneurship. Openness is part of that. Sharing the great scholarship and research that happens here to benefit the community around you, the state that you're a part of. And there are many ways to do that. And just think about the ways in your part of this institution that you can walk away and do that today. So to close, review of what open is. So it is free, press the 5R permissions. Open is a means. It's a way to help expand education, expand access to knowledge. It's a tool to help achieve your goals and your mission. Open is a process. It's not easy always, but it is something that we can work toward and something that's important to work toward. And finally, open is changing lives. It's having an impact right now, and you can leverage it to change lives right here in your community. Thank you. I did well. I did okay on time. Okay, so we have time for questions. I think use the microphone if you don't mind.
Come to the microphone.
Yeah, it's being live streamed.
My question is, are you aware of the Senate bill right now being passed for open source textbooks for University of Colorado, and if you can speak to that and how students can actually help advocate for that to be passed?
So thank you for the question, and my understanding of the bill is that it is already moving forward. So I think it's always important to educate your elected representatives about this issue and how it affects you. My understanding of the bill is that it's going to create a council that's going to look at this issue and recommend actions for the future. So make sure that you're part of that process, and make sure that your elected representatives understand what kind of actions you want them to take in the next session.
Can I follow up with?
Yeah, go for it.
Would an elected representative to be like CU student government? Would that be something that could do that?
Sure. So I meant you as a Colorado citizen reaching out to your senators and assembly members. Is that it? Here. So that. Also, I'll note that here in Boulder, actually, your congressperson in the U.S. Congress, Jared Polis, has been a huge champion for this issue and has sponsored legislation related to OER. So
Yeah, sweet.
definitely let him know. But in terms of student government, that can always be a powerful voice in terms of communicating on behalf of students to decision makers. So absolutely.
Hi, Nicole. Jeff Rubenstein with, excuse me, with the online learning program here at CU Boulder. Could you speak a little bit to the challenges that faculty face in adopting OER as opposed to just the turnkey textbook, and the shifting emphasis from straight ahead OER into more of an emphasis on open pedagogies? Thanks.
Definitely. So regarding the adoption of OER, so in some cases adopting OER is just as easy as using a traditional textbook if you're using something like the OpenStax textbooks, which are designed to work just like traditional textbooks. In cases where a faculty member might be going out and looking for different pieces of resources or collecting them, there can be technical challenges. How do I deliver this to my students? How do I fill out the bookstore adoption form when I don't have an ISBN for the textbook? And I think these are important places where support staff on campus can help educate faculty. So I think one great pointer is that because open educational resources are open, you can put them directly into the LMS that you're using. I'm not sure what you use here, Moodle, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, and deliver it to students directly there. They can also be printed and put in the bookstore. But in a lot of cases, it's not always easy to know where and when to be able to do this. So I think that's one large challenge. I think also this idea of remix, revise, some of the R's. In theory, you have permission to do that, but it isn't always easy to actually do that. So there's some educational resources that are distributed in ways that make it easy. For example, in a way you can get a Google Doc version of it or a Word version of it or the open source equivalent and be able to edit things and print it up. There's a movement toward putting a lot of content into WordPress, which is an open source software that's used for a lot of blogging. There are plugins that work with that can make it really useful for education. So there are technological solutions that are developing to make that easier, but it's not always easy as an individual faculty member. You find an OER online and, how do I get into this to change it? And again, there are a lot of different parts of the university that have that expertise that could be supportive in educating faculty. And then regarding open pedagogy, I think that it's one of those change curve things. So there are some faculty that just want to start doing that now, like the example I gave with the business or project management textbook where the students are building the textbook while they're learning from the textbook. And it's like an amazing educational experience and innovative and really powerful for students, but not all professors want to teach that way. And that's okay. I think in terms of looking at it from the university perspective, the question is, how do we enable professors who want to teach that way to do that, while also providing support to the professors who prefer to stay in a more traditional environment and take small steps toward opening up the way they teach. The first step being starting to use open educational resources that at least give them the permission and control over resources that allow them to evolve in that direction. This is like chicken. Is any?
Hi, Nicole. Oh,
Hi.
How would you suggest going about promoting OERs for professors that teach using textbooks that they wrote? And in a lot of, we know this happens a lot, but in a lot of cases, they're not even necessarily profiting off of those textbook purchases anymore because the publisher owns copyright, but there's still some kind of affinity to that particular way of presenting that material, and it's probably the way that they're most comfortable teaching it in their area of expertise. So is that something you guys have thought about or talked about?
So I'll give you this old saying, start with the low-hanging fruit and remember that all fruit falls eventually. So there are professors who are in a position who want to change the way they're teaching. Focus on those professors, give them support, make them aware, work with them. There's some professors who don't want to use OER and may never, and that's okay. This is a movement. It's a movement in a direction, and not everybody needs to be part of it right away. And but if it keeps going and starts gaining momentum, more and more will become a part of it. And earlier this year, Pearson's stock suffered a 30% drop because, the traditional industry is facing a lot of challenges. So changes are happening, anyways. And, we've seen across different types of industries that changes happen and help move people who prefer the old model in a more open direction. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll just note one more thing. The slides that I used today, they are openly licensed. They are an open educational resource. I've included all of the citations and links to all of the things that I showed, and they've been published online, and the easiest way to find them is Twitter. But I'm sure we'll find a way to distribute them as well.